My fiancée and her parents mocked my mother at our engagement party. I called off the wedding. My name is Liam. I'm 33 years old, and up until a few weeks ago, I was living in a state of blissful certainty. I believed I had found the woman I would build a life with, grow old with, and love until my final days. Her name is Chloe. We met 6 years ago, not in some dramatic, cinematic way, but on a charity fun run introduced by mutual friends. It was ordinary, but what we felt was anything but. Her laugh was a bright, infectious sound that seemed to make the world a little less serious. Her mind was sharp, her wit was quick, and I was completely captivated from the very first conversation. Our connection was instant and effortless, a rare and beautiful thing. A year ago, on a quiet evening under a sky full of stars, I asked her to be my wife, and she said yes. It felt like the universe had finally aligned everything perfectly. I had the right person at the right time. But life has a way of reminding you that nothing is ever that simple. When you marry someone, you aren't just entering a partnership with them, you are, in a way, merging with their family. And Chloe's parents, Richard and Barbara Harrison, were a force of nature, a destructive one. They were the kind of people who walked into a room and expected it to rearrange itself around them. They were loud, not in volume, but in presence. Their opinions were presented as facts, and they moved through the world with an unshakable conviction of their own superiority. At first, I tried to be generous. I dismissed their behavior as a personality quirk, a bit of harmless, old-fashioned pomposity. I loved their daughter, so I wanted to love them, or at least tolerate them. But over time, their harmless quirks revealed themselves to be symptoms of a deep-seated arrogance, a condescending streak that colored every single one of their interactions. They didn't just think they were better, they needed everyone else to know it. Before I get to the catastrophic event that shattered my world, I need to tell you about my mother, Eleanor. To say she was the most incredible person I have ever known feels like an understatement. She was my moral compass, my greatest supporter, and the source of my strength. My mum fought a brutal, soul-crushing, 3-year battle with cancer before she passed away 2 years ago. I watched her endure unimaginable pain, but she faced her illness with a grace and courage that still humbles me to think about. Even in her weakest moments, her primary concern was always for others. She taught me about kindness, not as a weakness, but as a profound strength. She taught me about generosity, not just with money, but with time and spirit. And most importantly, she taught me the importance of standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. She was my rock, my hero, but she was also a quiet, unsung benefactor to many people, including, in a twist of cruel irony, Chloe's family. What very few people knew was that the Harrisons owed my mother everything. Years ago, their family business, a chain of upscale bakeries called Harrison's Fine Pastries, was on the brink of collapse due to mismanagement. It was my mother, a retired marketing consultant, who stepped in. She didn't just lend them money, she co-signed a critical business loan that no bank would give them on their own. She spent weeks helping them restructure their finances, creating a new business plan, and rebranding their entire image to bring them into the 21st century. Later, when their main commercial dough sheeter broke down, a catastrophically expensive piece of equipment they couldn't afford to replace, my mother quietly bought them a new one. She didn't want their business to falter again. She never asked for a word of thanks, even though the money she spent could have gone toward her own mounting medical bills. That was just who she was. Even Chloe's brother, Kyle, was a recipient of her generosity. Kyle was the golden child, a smirking, entitled young man who had his parents' arrogance without any of their, admittedly limited, charm. When he was struggling to pay the final, exorbitant tuition fee for his prestigious MBA program, my mother paid it for him. She had just received a small inheritance from her own mother, and without a second thought, she transferred the funds, telling him only, "Just focus on your studies, dear. Make your parents proud." And yet, through all of this, the Harrisons never showed an ounce of genuine gratitude. They accepted her help as if it were their due, a tribute owed to their greatness. When I first introduced Chloe to my mum, things seemed fine. My mother adored Chloe's spirit and energy, and Chloe was always polite and respectful, a perfect picture of a loving future daughter-in-law. But after my mother passed away, and our wedding drew closer, I started to notice a subtle shift. It wasn't overt hostility, but a quiet undercurrent of condescension that began to surface in Chloe, mirroring her parents. There were small, passive-aggressive remarks. Once, while looking at a photo of my mother, Chloe commented she was such a strong personality, it must have been a lot to grow up with. The implication was clear: my mother was overbearing. Another time, when discussing our future home, she dismissed my desire for a small garden like my mother's, calling it a bit quaint and old-fashioned. The comments pricked at me, a small injustice against my mother's memory, but I tried to rationalize them. Maybe Chloe was just nervous, trying to find her place in a new family with different dynamics, trying to assert her own identity separate from the past. I loved her, so I made excuses for her. Things came to a dramatic and horrifying head about a month before the wedding. Richard and Barbara insisted on hosting an intimate pre-wedding dinner at the exclusive, members-only country club they belonged to. My initial reaction was one of relief. I thought it was a lovely gesture, perhaps their way of finally showing some respect, of making up for past slights. I even foolishly told myself, maybe this is how they show respect to our side of the family. This is them trying. I could not have been more wrong. The party wasn't an intimate gathering. It was a stage. It was a performance designed for Richard and Barbara to showcase their wealth and social standing. They spent the evening loudly boasting about their connections to the club's management, about the favors they had to call in to secure the private dining room, and how much effort went into planning such a perfect and classy evening. Unsurprisingly, the guest list was almost entirely composed of their relatives and important business associates. From my side, there was only my father, my older sister, and two of my closest friends, the only people who truly mattered to me. It felt less like a celebration of our love and more like a networking event for the Harrison brand. After dinner, when the expensive wine was flowing freely and the mood was ripe for their grandstanding, the main performance began. Richard stood up, grabbing the microphone with the practiced ease of a man who loves the sound of his own voice. "Welcome, everyone, welcome," he boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "We're here tonight to celebrate the merging of two families, and especially to celebrate our wonderful Chloe and Liam." The way he paused, dragging out my name as if he'd momentarily forgotten it, was a small, sharp slap to my dignity. It was deliberate. He went on, waxing lyrical for 10 minutes, about how brilliant, beautiful, and exceptional Chloe was, the shining star of their family. He concluded by saying she was now marrying someone who would certainly help her continue to grow in her career, which is a fine choice for someone like him. He shot a smug, condescending wink into the crowd as he said it, and a few of Chloe's cousins chuckled appreciatively. I felt a hot flush of anger creep up my neck. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my composure, but I could feel my blood starting to simmer. Next, it was Barbara's turn. She floated to the microphone, a vision in silk and pearls. She began with a similar gushing torrent of praise for her perfect daughter, but then, just like her husband, she veered into a series of thinly veiled insults, directed squarely at me and my family. Our daughter is a diamond, you see, she said, her eyes flicking toward me with a dismissive half-smile. She has always deserved the absolute best, someone on her level, with the same background. She paused for effect. And well, we all have to make little sacrifices for love, don't we? It's a testament to her good heart. The most painful part of it all was Chloe. She just sat there beside me, beaming at her parents, soaking in their toxic praise. After her mother's particularly cutting remark, she gave a little laugh and squeezed my hand under the table, as if to say, "Aren't they funny? Don't take them so seriously." But it wasn't funny. It was calculated, cruel, and deeply humiliating. I looked over at my father, a quiet, dignified man, who was staring down at his plate, his expression tight with discomfort. My sister Sarah caught my eye and gave me a look. That was a mixture of fury and sympathy. The breaking point came when Richard took the microphone again. "Just one last thing before we wrap up," he announced. "I'd like to make a toast to someone who isn't with us tonight, but who played a big part in this upcoming union, his mother, Eleanor." For one fleeting, naive moment, my heart leaped with a flicker of hope. I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe he's going to finally acknowledge her. Maybe he's going to say something kind. I was a complete and utter fool. Eleanor was a very unique woman, he continued, and the tone he used was dripping with a mocking sort of amusement. The crowd leaned in. She had a real knack for inserting herself where she wasn't needed, didn't she? Always thought she knew exactly how everything should be done. He let out a loud, self-satisfied laugh, and Barbara joined in immediately, as if on cue. "Oh, she certainly had strong opinions," Barbara added, her voice shrill. "Does anyone remember how she insisted on helping us with the business, even when we hadn't asked, and, frankly, found it a bit meddlesome? So much unsolicited advice." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were openly mocking my mother, the woman who had saved them from ruin, in front of a room full of people, at my own engagement party. And Chloe, my fiancée, instead of being outraged, instead of shutting her parents down, just giggled and said softly, "Oh, Dad, stop it," as if it were a harmless, funny anecdote. That was the sound that broke the world. Herr Giggler. "What are you doing?" I shot to my feet, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The room fell silent. "Are you making fun of my mother?" My voice was a low growl. I shot to my feet, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. The entire room fell silent. Every eye in the room turned to me. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I thought it would break through. My face felt hot, with a rage so pure it was dizzying. "Easy there, son," Richard said, his smug expression unwavering. "It's just a bit of light-hearted fun, no need to be so sensitive." "Fun?" I yelled, my voice cracking with disbelief and fury. "You call that fun? My mother helped you. She saved your pathetic business when you were about to lose everything. She co-signed your loan. She paid for your equipment. She paid for your son's tuition. And this is how you repay her? This is her thanks? By turning her into a punchline at her own son's engagement dinner?" A collective gasp went through the room. Richard's face went from ruddy to pale in a heartbeat. Barbara looked like she had been slapped. "This is a private family matter," Richard hissed. "You made it public the moment you used her memory as a punchline," I shot back. Richard's smugness finally evaporated, replaced by a flash of irritation. "Now, listen here, young man. You're overreacting. We meant no harm. But if you're going to cause a scene over a little joke, maybe you're not ready for this marriage." That sentence, delivered with such dismissive arrogance, was the final straw. It laid bare the complete and utter contempt he had for me and for the memory of my mother. Chloe finally spoke, her voice a panicked whisper as she grabbed my arm. "Liam, can we please just go outside and talk about this?" I yanked my arm away from her touch, as if it had burned me. "No, Chloe, we can't. There is nothing to talk about. Not unless your parents can suddenly grow a conscience and understand the profound disrespect they've just shown my mother." Barbara sighed dramatically, fanning herself with a napkin, as if she were the one being wronged. "Liam, this is supposed to be a happy occasion. You are ruining everyone's evening with this outburst." "I'm ruining it?" My voice trembled with fury. "Number, you ruined it. Your family ruined it the moment you decided to use my deceased mother, your benefactor, as entertainment." "And you," I said, turning to Chloe, my voice growing cold, "you just sat there. You sat there, and you laughed. You have disappointed me more than I can possibly say." Chloe's face flushed, with a blotchy red color. "I didn't know they were going to say that," she stammered, her eyes wide and pleading. "But you laughed," I shot back, my voice echoing in the silent room. "You laughed at every single word. You didn't even try to stop them. Not for 1 second. You chose them." A low murmur of gossip began to ripple through the room. People were whispering, looking from me to the Harrisons, and back again, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and morbid curiosity. "All right, that's enough," Richard said, his voice a low command, as he stood up to assert his authority. "If you're this offended, Liam, perhaps you should just leave." I looked at him, then at Barbara, then at Chloe, and for a moment, I considered it, just walking out and leaving them to their perfect evening. But then my eyes swept the room. I saw my father, a quiet, hard-working man, looking utterly heartbroken. I saw my sister, her eyes filled with protective anger. I saw the faces of the people who had mocked my mother and the faces of those who had let them. And I realized I couldn't just leave. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my mother, her legacy, and the values I was raised to uphold. I couldn't let them have the last word. I took a deep breath, looked at my father, and said, "I need to go back in." "What?" My sister whispered, aghast. "Why?" "You don't owe them anything." "I know," I said, my gaze steady, "but I can't let it end like this. I need to make it clear to Chloe, to her parents, and to everyone in that room, that this is over." My father hesitated for a second, then nodded. "If that's what you need to do, son, we're right behind you." I turned and walked back into the dining room. The knot of anger and hurt in my stomach was still there, but my mind was strangely clear. I wasn't going back to argue. I was going back to end it. The murmuring in the room rose again as I re-entered. Chloe was still at the table, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperation. She stood up as I approached. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What? What are you doing?" I ignored her, walking straight up to Richard and Barbara, who were still seated, their faces masks of indignation. Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised to see me back. Barbara was still wearing the same plastic smile she'd had on all night. "Back so soon, Liam?" Richard said, his voice laced with sarcasm. I didn't dignify his taunt with a response. Instead, I turned to face the room of stunned guests. "Excuse me, everyone. I'm sorry to interrupt your evening once again," I said, my voice loud and clear, carrying across the silent room. The whispers instantly died. Every eye was on me. My heart was still pounding, but my voice was steady. "I have an announcement to make." I glanced at Chloe, who was now frozen beside the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if in prayer. I know this isn't the time or place anyone was expecting for this kind of news, but after the events of tonight, I see no other way. There is no reason to continue this farce. I took a deep breath, looked directly at Chloe, and delivered the final, fatal blow. This wedding is off. A collective gasp went through the room. It was followed by a cacophony of shocked whispers and the scraping of chairs as people turned to each other in disbelief. Chloe's jaw dropped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Liam, no!" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I held up a hand to silence her, refusing to let her interrupt. The room was now deathly quiet. Even the waitstaff stood frozen in the corner. "This isn't just about what happened tonight," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "This is about the kind of family I was about to marry into. A family that has no respect for me, no respect for my mother, and no respect for the basic decency she taught me to live by. I will not spend the rest of my life being treated this way." Chloe finally broke down into sobs. "Liam, please don't do this," she wept. I looked at her, but the love I once felt was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. "Chloe, tonight, you showed me who you really are, and I can't live with that person. I deserve better than this, and my mother deserved to rest in peace." Richard finally found his voice, his previous condescension now replaced with pure fury. "You're making a very big mistake, kid," he spat. "You're throwing away the best thing that ever happened to you over nothing." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Nothing? You think disrespecting my mother is nothing? You think treating me like I'm beneath you is nothing? No, Mr. Harrison. The mistake would be going through with this wedding and tying myself to a family that is so utterly undeserving." Barbara now looked like she was on the verge of tears, or perhaps just mortified that her perfectly orchestrated evening had imploded so spectacularly. "Liam," she pleaded, her voice quivering with false sincerity, "we were so excited to have you in the family. It would have been so nice to finally have a man around the house who isn't afraid of a little hard work, you know." She offered a weak, patronizing smile, and a few of her relatives tried to chuckle along awkwardly. I looked at Chloe one last time, a tiny, foolish part of me, hoping she would finally stand up for me, that she would show some sign of protest against her parents' cruelty. But she just stood there, a weak, defeated smile on her face, completely powerless. "I don't think so, Mrs. Harrison," I said, my gaze locking with hers. Her face went rigid, the smile vanishing. "This is over." I turned my back on them without a second glance. My father and sister joined me, and we walked out of the country club, leaving behind a scene of chaos, stunned faces, and a sobbing Chloe. The feeling of walking out that door was like dropping a 1,000-pound weight from my shoulders. There was pain, yes, but mostly there was an overwhelming sense of relief. A dream wedding, a sense of belonging, and the feeling of being a second-class citizen in my own relationship, it was all over. The following days were a siege. My phone was a battlefield of unanswered calls and unread messages. Chloe's texts were a desperate stream of, "I'm so sorry. I love you. Please just talk to me. My parents are monsters, I know." Richard's were blunt and threatening. "You have publicly humiliated this family, and there will be consequences." I deleted them all. Then, the consequences arrived. I worked as a project manager for a large architectural firm. On Wednesday morning, I was called into my boss's office. He looked deeply uncomfortable. "Liam," he started, "I got a call from Richard Harrison. He's a major investor in the new waterfront development project, our biggest client. He expressed concerns about your emotional stability and professional judgment." My blood ran cold. "He didn't explicitly demand anything," my boss continued, avoiding my eyes, but the implication was clear. "I have to put you on paid administrative leave until this blows over." I had been blacklisted. Richard wasn't just trying to intimidate me, he was trying to ruin me. That evening, there was a frantic knocking at my door. It was Chloe. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy. "Liam, please," she begged, as I stood silently in the doorway. "Let me in. We need to talk." Reluctantly, I let her in. She burst into tears. "I am so sorry. You were right. They're horrible, but you don't understand, Liam. I'm trapped." She told me a story of financial dependency, of a trust fund she couldn't access, until she was 35, or married with their approval, of a lifetime of psychological manipulation. "I was scared," she whispered. "I'm so weak around them, but I love you. We can run away, start over somewhere new." For a moment, I almost wavered. Her pain seemed genuine. But then I looked into her eyes, and I saw the same weakness that had allowed her to laugh at her parents' cruelty. She wasn't a partner, she was a liability. "No, Chloe," I said, my voice flat. "It's too late. The damage is done. You need to leave." After she left, a profound sense of unease settled over me. I needed to feel connected to my mother's strength. I went to the small mahogany memory box, where I kept her most precious things. I opened the lid, and my heart stopped. A small, antique silver brooch, a delicate filigree starling with a tiny sapphire eye, was gone. It belonged to my great-grandmother. It was the one piece of jewellery my mother cherished, the one thing she had given me on her deathbed, saying, "This is our family's strength. Keep it safe." Panic clawed at me. I tore my apartment apart, but it was useless. A cold, sickening realization washed over me. Chloe had been here a week before the party to drop off some paperwork. She had been in my study alone. My fingers trembled as I typed the text. Sharp and devoid of emotion, "Where is my mother's brooch?" A few minutes later, a reply. "What are you talking about?" The lie sent a fresh wave of rage through me. The silver starling brooch from her memory box. "It's gone. You took it, didn't you?" The delay was longer this time. Then, I borrowed it. For something old for the wedding. I wanted to feel closer to her. "Borrowed it?" I typed back, my fingers stabbing the screen. "You stole it, Chloe. You went into my private things, and you stole from my dead mother." "It's at my parents' house," she admitted, in a final, pathetic text. "I left it there for safekeeping." That was the final desecration. She had taken a sacred symbol of my mother's love and stored it in the house of the very people who had mocked her. But something about her story felt wrong. Why would she leave it there? A dark, terrible suspicion began to form in my mind. On a hunch, I called my sister Sarah, her voice a soothing balm of sanity. "Sarah, I need a huge favor. Can you check the high-end pawn shops downtown? Look for a silver starling brooch with a sapphire eye. Just look." 2 hours later, she called me back, her voice tight with fury. "Liam, I found it. It's at Sterling & Sons on Morrison Avenue. A young man matching Kyle's description pawned it 2 days ago for $5,000. The world tilted on its axis. They hadn't just borrowed it for safekeeping, they had stolen it for cash. Kyle, the MBA my mother had paid for, had pawned her most precious possession. The rage that filled me now was different. It wasn't hot and explosive. It was ice cold and diamond hard. I went to my study and pulled out a file. My mother, meticulous to the end, had kept everything. Copies of the cashed checks to the Harrisons, the co-signed loan agreement, the receipt for the commercial dough sheeter, the wire transfer confirmation for Kyle's tuition. A complete, undeniable record of their debt, both financial and moral. I drove to the pawn shop, bought back my mother's legacy with my own money, the cool weight of it in my pocket, a comforting anchor. Then, with the file under my arm, I drove straight to the Harrisons' fortress of a home. I didn't knock. I rang the bell until Richard himself yanked the door open, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell do you want?" "I'm here to settle our accounts," I said, pushing past him into the marble entryway. Barbara and Chloe rushed in, drawn by the noise. Kyle sauntered in last, a smug look on his face. "Get out of my house," Richard snarled. "I don't think so," I said calmly. I opened the file and laid the first document on the polished hall table, the loan agreement with my mother's signature, her home listed as collateral. "Recognize this?" Richard's face went slack. I laid down the next one, the check for your bakery equipment, and the next, the wire transfer for your son's education. "What is this?" Barbara whispered, her voice trembling. "This," I said, my voice ringing with authority, "is the unsolicited advice my mother gave you. This is proof that you are a fraud, hypocrites of the highest order." I turned to Kyle. "And you took it to another level." I pulled the brooch from my pocket and held it up. Then I pulled out the pawnshop receipt. "You stole this from my home and sold it. My mother paid for your future, and you repaid her by hocking her memory for pocket money." Kyle's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure panic. Chloe let out a choked sob, staring at her brother in horror. "Now, here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the marble floor. "Tomorrow morning, Richard, you are going to call my boss, and you are going to tell him you made a terrible mistake. You will praise my character, my professionalism, and you will ensure that any black mark against my name is permanently erased. Second, you will never, ever contact me or my family again. This is over." Richard puffed out his chest, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "And if I don't?" I smiled, a thin, mirthless expression. "If you don't, this entire file, along with a very detailed story about the stolen brooch, goes to two people. First, to the editor of the City Chronicle's society pages, and second, to every single one of those business associates and investors who were at our engagement party. I wonder how they'll feel about partnering with a family that builds its success on the charity of a dying woman they then mock in public. Your perfect reputation will be shattered. Your business will be ruined. You will be undone. The choice is yours." The silence in the grand entryway was absolute. I saw the calculation in Richard's eyes, the dawning horror in Barbara's, the utter defeat in Chloe's brackets nose. I had them. I had used their own weapon, their obsession with status and reputation, against them. I didn't wait for an answer. I put the brooch safely back in my pocket, gathered my mother's papers, gave Chloe one last look, not of anger, but of pity, and walked out the door, pulling it firmly shut behind me on my old life. The next day, my boss called, profusely apologetic. Richard Harrison had called him, singing my praises, calling the whole thing a terrible misunderstanding. A week later, I received a job offer from a rival firm. One of the guests at the party, a respected developer who had known and admired my mother professionally, had heard the full story through the grapevine and reached out. He said he valued integrity above all else. Driving home from my last day at my old job, with the cool, solid weight of my mother's brooch in my pocket, a profound and unshakable calm settled over me. The rage was gone. The hurt was a dull, fading ache. In their place was a quiet, unshakable certainty. I had done the right thing. I had stood up for myself, for my mother's memory, and for the simple, decent values she had worked so hard to teach me. I had lost a fiancée and a future I once thought I wanted. But in the rubble of that implosion, I had reclaimed something far more valuable, my self-respect my integrity, and the untarnished honor of my mother's memory. The world was quiet again, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely at peace. I was finally free.